The first thing to return to Rian was not sight, but scent. The sharp bite of frost and the bitter metallic tang of the north had dissolved completely, replaced by the rich aroma of carved cedar, fresh resin, and the faint sweetness of dried hearth herbs smoldering in the quiet air. The fragrant smoke drifted in gentle, rhythmic waves, easing the deep, hollow ache that had settled within his chest. Awareness returned in slow, heavy layers. Beneath him lay no unyielding slab of abyssal obsidian, no frozen earth of the wastes, but something warm and merciful. Heavy woolen weaves wrapped his battered frame, their comforting weight resting over limbs that felt utterly spent. For the first time since opening his eyes in the false city, a deep, abiding warmth seeped directly into his marrow, untangling muscles worn raw by weeks of flight, blood, and quiet horror. His eyelids parted reluctantly. Above him stretched a vaulted canopy of pale cedar, its timber beams arching overhead like the canopy of an ancient grove. Etched into the grain were flowing, delicate traceries, intertwining vines, pale leaves, and constellations that seemed to shift and dance in the golden spill of a nearby lantern. Cool silver moonlight poured through a sweeping circular arch cut into the stone wall, painting wide ribbons across the polished floor. For several long moments he simply stared. No echoing shrieks, no shattering steel, no biting freeze, only silence. From somewhere far beyond the chamber walls came the low, timeless rush of mountain water and the soft rustle of pine branches stirred by an alpine draft. It was a sound so ordinary, so unmarred by dark sorcery, that it burned against his eyes. He did not know this room. Yet for the first time since awakening in Sigrid's hut, he no longer felt as though he were drawing breath inside a lie. "Easy, my boy, easy." The voice was deeply familiar, grounding him instantly against the drift of the dark. A calloused, trembling hand pressed gently against Rian's sternum, easing him back into the soft linens. "You are safe. You are home. Adora rests in the adjoining hall. She refused to leave your side until barely an hour passed." Beside the couch sat an old man. His beard hung long and silvered, his face cut with deep, weathered lines of ancient worry, yet his eyes shone warm and immovable. Across his brow rested a narrow circlet of gold, and over his shoulders fell a heavy, wool-lined mantle. Rian searched the old man's face. Then, deep beneath the jagged scars carved into his mind by Zarek's unseen scalpel, something shifted. Not a fleeting fragment. Not an illusion. A true memory surfaced from the depths. "Grandfather?" The old man's lips parted into a fragile smile, his eyes shimmering with unshed tears as the boy spoke the title without hesitation or prompt. "You have no notion of how deeply you were mourned, my boy, or what it means to hear you speak my name after all that has been done to you." A shaky, breathy laugh escaped him, and a single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. He took Rian's hand in both of his own, gripping it with a fierce, surprising strength. "I feared the shadow had swallowed you whole." Rian looked down at their joined hands, his chest tightening at the sheer weight of grief radiating from the old lord. "Grandfather, I am not the prince who was stolen from your gates. They changed me, they unraveled my mind, and remade my face." Rian reached up with his free hand, his fingers tracing the faint mark along his ear. Hokar looked down at the gesture, then reached up, his rough, calloused thumb gently brushing just beneath the thin scar on Rian's ear. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no flicker of doubt, only a fierce, unyielding recognition. "They can alter your skin, boy. They can drape you in their shadows and try to forge you into a weapon for their dark wars," Hokar said, his voice hardening with quiet pride. "But they know nothing of the iron that binds the Min Eldereth. I watched your first steps upon this stone. I taught your hands how to seat a blade. I know the shape of your soul, Rian, and no ancient malice can cut that out of you." Rian opened his mouth to answer, but his throat seized. He searched the old elf's gaze, looking desperately for the smallest shadow of suspicion, for hesitation, for fear of what he had become. He found none. There was only love. And with that, the armor he had forged since waking in Sigrid's hut, the paranoia, the bitter anger, the desperate, unyielding drive cracked completely. The strength that had dragged him across the bone wastes and through the abyssal depths beneath the false city simply vanished. His shoulders sagged. His hand began to tremble uncontrollably against his grandfather's grip. He whispered, but the word broke into a ragged, silent breath. He leaned forward, his forehead coming to rest against Hokar's shoulder. For a fleeting second he fought it, clenching his jaw as if he could force the tide back. He could not. A ragged sob tore from his chest before he could stop it, followed by another. Years of terror, confusion, and silent torment poured out of him, no longer as a prince bearing the burden of a broken realm, but as a terrified youth who had finally crawled out of the dark and found his way home. Hokar offered no empty words. He simply wrapped his arms around the boy and held him fast, resting one weathered hand against the back of Rian's head, just as he had in the quiet years before the war. The world narrowed to that single, still point in time. From the corridor beyond came the soft click of leather boots against stone. A shadow passed across the pale blue lanterns hanging along the passage before slipping away. Hokar smiled softly into the dim light. I take it you wish to seek out your companion? Adora. She held the line, Rian rasped, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. She brought me back from the edge. Hokar's expression remained steady. He showed no surprise that the warrior he had bound to his grandson's side so many years ago had crossed the world to fulfill her vow. Go to her, boy. Hokar nodded toward the arched entryway. Only tread carefully. These halls may feel like strangers to a mind still returning from the dark. Rian rose slowly to his feet. He met his grandfather's gaze once more, offering a quiet, grateful nod before turning toward the passage. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and Rian stepped out into the crisp mountain night. Guided by the crackle of burning pine and the scent of sweet resin, he followed the winding stone track until it opened into a secluded mountain enclave. It was a place drawn straight from his oldest, unmarred memories, a massive horseshoe of ancient granite jutting out over the sheer mountain face. Beyond its edge lay a vast sea of cloud, miles of rolling silver mist moving in slow, silent waves beneath the peak. High above, a brilliant moon hung against the ink-black expanse, bathing the overlook in ethereal light. Standing at the very precipice where stone met the void was Adora. The moonlight caught the rich copper tones of her hair, carving her sharp elven profile into a striking silhouette against the sea of mist. Beside her, a small hearth fire danced, casting orange embers high into the freezing air. She was crouched low by the coals, quiet and watchful, using a pine branch to tend the embers. The movement was rhythmic, sending soft cascades of light swirling up into the night. Rian lingered in the shadows of the rock, content to simply watch. The rigid tension that had defined her every step through the bone wastes had melted away. Beside the quiet flames she looked rested, profoundly at peace, a tranquility he knew she had bought with her own blood. A quiet warmth bloomed in his chest. After the horrors she had endured on his behalf, it felt right to see her like this. "Are you going to haunt the shadows all night, my prince?" Adora's voice broke the quiet, soft, yet carrying easily across the stone. Rian stepped forward, the scent of cedar clinging to his robes as he approached the hearth. He settled onto a weathered log opposite her, leaning his elbows on his knees as his gaze drifted past the flames toward the unfamiliar constellations above. The transition from the suffocating gloom of the obsidian pit to this sky was dizzying. "Does any of it stir your memory?" Adora asked gently, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Fragments," Rian replied, his eyes tracing the starlight. "It is more the weight of the place. It feels anchored, like a song I forgot the words to." He paused, looking into the coals. "What do our people call this peak, Adora?" "Mount Caelum," she answered softly. "Caelum," Rian murmured, testing the word. It felt ancient, heavy with an importance his fractured mind could not yet grasp. "It translates to heaven in the high tongue," Adora said, tilting her head back to draw in the mountain air. "A fitting name for a sanctuary above the clouds." A quiet ache settled behind Rian's ribs. He wondered how he could have ever forgotten a place of such beauty, or what dark necessity had forced him beyond its borders. Everything he had lost seemed gathered here: warmth, safety, kin. Between them the fire hissed, spitting a shower of amber light into the dark. "I am glad you returned to us, Rian," Adora said, her tone deepening. The warrior's mask had vanished completely, her eyes soft in the glow. "When the shadow took you in the pit, I believed we had lost you forever." Rian held his hands toward the hearth's heat, silence settling between them, punctuated only by the crackle of the wood and the distant rush of mountain falls. After a long moment, he looked up. "How did we escape the abyss? The last I remember was the dark collapsing." "Your grandfather and the High Elders," Adora explained, her shoulders relaxing. "The scouts who fled the mountain brought word of our plight. They broke the siege before the horde could swallow us." "To stand against such an ancient force," Rian murmured. "How did they manage it?" Adora looked out over the sea of cloud, a faint smile touching her lips. "I asked Lord Hokar the same. He merely told me that some roots run deeper than the dark." Rian did not press further, sensing that the truth belonged to powers he was not yet ready to wield. As the flames settled into a deep, ruby glow, their quiet conversation filled the space between them. For a few fleeting hours, the weight of their journey felt lighter, but the quiet of the overlook was eventually broken by the soft rustle of robes. An attendant emerged from the shadows, bowing low at the edge of the firelight. "My pardon, young Lord Lady Adora. The Council of Elders has gathered in the High Spire. They await your presence." Adora nodded smoothly. "We shall present ourselves shortly. Leave us." The attendant bowed once more and faded into the dark. "I had hoped the night would last longer," Adora murmured, rising from her seat. They took one final look at the quiet expanse before leaving the hearth behind. The attendant waited near the grand archway leading toward the central dome. But as they approached, Adora caught Rian by the sleeve, guiding him down a shadowed, winding gallery that branched off from the main hall. "Where are we heading?" Rian asked, matching her fast pace. "There is something you must see before you face the Elders," she replied quietly. The passage was lined with towering pillars of ancient heartwood, carved by master artisans. In the moonlight, intricate reliefs depicting historic standoffs, forgotten wars, and the stern visages of long-past lords caught the pale light. Halfway down the hall, Rian stopped dead in his tracks, pulling his arm from Adora's grip. His breath caught in his throat. He found himself staring at a statue carved from dark, blood-grained wood. Unlike the idealized heroes lining the rest of the gallery, this figure was carved with sharp, uncompromising detail, capturing a face of fierce intensity, with eyes that seemed to pierce the very timber. An ache bloomed behind Rian's ribs as he searched the carved features, desperately chasing a memory that remained just beyond his reach. He stepped closer, tracing the line of the statue's jaw with trembling fingers. "I know him," he whispered. Adora stepped up beside him, watching his face closely. "Do you remember his name?" Rian closed his eyes, searching the void of his past. Nothing came. "No," he admitted quietly, "but I know his face." Adora reached out, brushing away a layer of fallen pine needles from the statue's pedestal, revealing the deep runes cut into the base. "His name was Hothan," she said softly, her voice echoing down the corridor. Rian did not look away from the carving. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing his mind to conjure a voice, a laugh, a single moment. There was only quiet emptiness. "I cannot reach him," he whispered, the words bitter on his tongue. "There is nothing there." "You do not need a memory to carry him, Rian," Adora murmured gently, placing a hand upon his shoulder. "Whenever he was weighed down by command, he would stand precisely as you stand now, hands clasped, looking into the dark. I see your father in the way you hold a blade, in the way you stand your ground against the storm. He is not lost." Rian looked at the surrounding statues, trying to anchor her words. "And the old lore? What do our people say of those who pass?" "The Min Eldereth do not believe our spirits fade into the void," Adora answered, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "The mountain holds them. It cradles their essence within the deep stone and the ancient roots until the realm needs them once more." Rian swallowed hard, the phrasing twisting uncomfortably in his thoughts before he could stop it. "So, his spirit was passed down to me?" A soft, genuine chuckle broke from Adora, a sudden splash of warmth against the solemn air of the gallery. The blunt, unadorned way he had spoken caught her off guard. "Not quite, my prince," she said, her smile slowly fading into a quiet solemnity. A dryad's spirit returns to the roots only when their final hour is met in peace, free of malice, fear, and bloodshed. It is a sacred cycle of renewal. Rian looked back at the fierce face of Hothen, reading the truth in the harsh lines of the carving. My father's end was not peaceful, was it? Adora turned toward the shadow of an adjoining pillar, her voice dropping lower. We prayed it were otherwise, Rian. But his stand at the breach, his sacrifice for the mountain, for our blood. She met his eyes, the moonlight catching the raw grief in her gaze. It was a ruinous end, a shattering of his very essence. It tore him from the mountain's roots, barring his spirit from ever returning to the cycle or walking among our people again. The silence of the gallery settled over them, deep and heavy as a burial vault. Rian felt the weight of a sacrifice he could not remember, yet one that had bought his very breath. "Forgive me, Rian," Adora said softly, turning back toward the main passage. "I did not mean to burden you further before the council. I only wished for you to see him." Rian caught her arm as she passed, his grip firm. "Do not apologize, Adora," he said, his voice steady and warm. "You gave me something the dark could not take. Thank you." She offered a single, resolute nod. Together, they turned away from the statue of Hothen and stepped out of the gallery, heading toward the high stone doors of the council chamber.